Werner Bosmans from the European Commission. Werner joined the Directorate General Environment of the European Commission in 2005. He's the team leader on plastics and initiated the work around the circular economy. The last years, he developed a plastic strategy, the directive on single-use plastics, and a legal proposal on that. He is now the team leader for several follow-up actions on plastics, including on chemical recycling.
It's a bit difficult because I don't know everything by heart, but I do know that I will talk a little bit about the context, so the plastic policies that we have in the European Commission, and then obviously about chemical recycling. I often like to start with this one, because that's why we're doing it for. Most of you will know the figures, the order of magnitude, they're coming, these figures are coming from the colleagues from Plastics Europe. So Alexander, there. Unfortunately, not all the data are from the same year, but it doesn't change the order of magnitude, and that is what counts in this kind of calculations. Anyhow, even those data, I mean, please take them as an order of magnitude, because nobody has the exact statistics. But still, between produced, collection, sent for recycling, and recycled in new plastics, you see every time it's a huge step down. And so that is the challenge. Oh, what do we have as a mainframe policy? Well, we are a bit in this strange period where we're coming from one commission to the next commission. You might remember, many of you have voted for a new European Parliament. As a consequence, there will be a new commission as well. The previous commission had the Green Deal as the top priority. Now that will change, but it doesn't mean that everything will change. Basic policies will remain. The circular economy, we all anticipate, does remain. And that's only because it makes a lot of sense, because it's about maintaining the value of products, materials, and resources in the economy for as long as possible. And that has both climate, environmental, and business gains. We try to make that a little bit clearer with a European strategy for plastics, from putting the plastic sector in the circular economy. The work in progress, but we've seen that the industry is working on it. And the things that needs to be worked upon are there in the list. They're valid for the circular economy in general, but they're specifically valid on plastics as well. It always starts with design for circularity. And the first thing is there, in fact, it's not even there, is the reduce factor, the prevention. Do we even need something? Can we do it alternatively? For the industry, that's not a nice business model, but still, we're looking at the society. You have longevity, reuse, repair, separate collection, recycling, recycled content. All the steps we need to work on. I'm going to focus just a little bit on recycled content, because it's extremely important, because you need the pull factor on the other side. Because if you don't have that, I mean, the economic system, unfortunately, and with this science jargon, the externalities are not internalized. For the non-economists here in the room, it means that your environmental impacts, and as with social impacts, the economic model does not take that into account. There's no price on that. There's very often no price on pollution. There are exceptions, but mostly. So you need to find other ways to do that. And one of the things we did is an aim of 10 million tons of recycled plastics in new products. We have put as well mandatory requirements for key products in packaging, coming back to that later, construction materials, textiles, vehicles. Most of them are in progress and not there yet. They are voted or they are under discussion. And we have as well a new regulation that is voted, but the implementing decisions will be hugely important. It's the eco-design of product regulation. You all have your fridges with the label A, B, C, D when you go for a fridge. You remember that, the energy labels. And once you get to the F, you say no, never. And in fact, these should be kicked out of the market. And so you make it a dynamic system. We want to do that for many environmental impacts, most, and for virtually all products. There are exceptions. plastics will be in there as well. Where do we have already recycled content targets? And it's the only one. This is in the so-called Single-Use Plastics Directive. The official name is much longer. That directive was meant to reduce marine litter. There are additional things that were in there, such as recycled content, and there are two targets in there of recycled content. For PET bottles, 25% by 25 next year, and for all bottles, 30% by 2030. These are relatively low targets. We knew that because it's the first time ever that this is put in legislation. But to put up the system in place is already a huge challenge, I can tell you. It needs implementing decisions on how you calculate things. We started naturally with mechanical recycling. We thought it was a piece of cake. Wasn't really. It was not complicated because the complicated thing is what we are struggling with today. Chemical recycling. It already starts with how do you define chemical recycling? We didn't do it. We do the things that don't need mechanical recycling because already it's extremely difficult to define in legal terms chemical recycling, in legal terms, not in chemical terms. Now that's the thing, will have mass balance accounting. There will be a specific allocation method. Most of you will be familiar with that. How do you account with the molecules in the recycling stream? It's not a free allocation, it's a fuel use excluded with third-party verification. So complete free allocation is not acceptable under EU legislation because in the Waste Framework Directive, you have a definition what recycling is. And recycling is a material recycled into a material, not into a fuel. So to be able to name that something recycled content as a consequence can not do it differently, you have to follow that path. Is that a good thing? It's a different thing. It's a legal framework, and such a legal framework, which once decided with 27 member states, is quite complicated to change. It is always possible, it's extremely complicated. This is the existing legal framework, which will at least for a couple of years be there. The most, I say, the fuel use excluded, where we're going to is the, what should I call it? The second method that offers the best business case for chemical recycling. So that's what we intend to do because of this. This is in policy terms, the advantages and disadvantages. I think you should all be aware of that. Virgin high quality, it can process some mixed and contaminated plastic waste streams and a lower environmental impact than incineration. On the contrary, or the disadvantages, low yields, it's often recycling into fuels, energy intensive, and the risk of using input waste that could also be recycled mechanically. The mechanical recycling sector often calls this cannibalizing their sector. Now, as a basic policy line, we say that chemical recycling should complement mechanical recycling if it causes less environmental burden, incineration, and virgin plastic production. And we believe that generally it does. Generally. The problem is that generally in policy and legal terms, it's not exactly precise. So we have a quite important study from the JRC, the Joint Research Center. For those who don't know it, it's the research center within the European Commission. We take that as state-of-the-art reports. So they say indeed that as a general rule, mechanical recycling is better than chemical recycling is better than incineration if you take overarching environmental impacts. Okay. I want to go one step further. So we had this single-use plastic directive. We now, in the meanwhile, have our packaging regulation. It is voted in spring last year, voted. It's not published yet. Complicated institutional arrangements. But what it says there is that all packaging should be recyclable by 2030. That recycled content targets of packaging formats at product sites, there are several of them, and the main one related to chemical recycling is contact sensitive non-PETs. Contact sensitive non-PETs. There's a regulation that says something about food contacts. Everything, plastic, every material that gets in contact with food has specific requirements. It's logic. That plastic comes into contact has a different standard than the one here or the one that you're sitting on. 10% now, or within a couple of years, 25% later. So we hope on the development of chemical recycling. In the broad sense of the word, we're not specifying a technology or not further specifying a technology. And there we need, again, to set up a methodology for calculation and verification of recycled content. It will build upon the methodology that we are now working on with this single-use plastics. It will build on that. It might be even a copy-paste, but it does not have to be. But we will be very close to that. But we have to do a couple of additional things there. We need to look at that secondary raw materials should be of sufficient quality to substitute primary raw materials. I think for chemical recycling that should be more or less okay. It might be more a problem for certain mechanical recycling. And we need to issue some sustainability criteria, which will be much more complicated. Way forward, circular economy of plastics in general is keeping products, plastics and resources in the loop and their value for as long as possible. Translate that in chemical recycling. It's part of the mix, but it needs to contribute to the decarbonization and defossilization because the carbon will be the main environmental impacts, but should disregard the other ones. So that is one is the main one. That was the brief overview in the time that Elizabeth was so gentle to give me. Thank you.